Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Non-Belief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all of our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Hello again, moms.
Hey, I had a crisis heading into this recording because this is going to be our only episode that releases during Black History Month. And just randomly, the boys and I have been reading a couple of books that center in sort of the Jim Crow era. We just finished reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and we started Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, which is a book that was really influential to me when I was young. And it's been a really interesting experience. And so I was thinking, should we talk about this? Because it is Black History Month, but I think I just have too many thoughts about it at this point. So I kind of want to get through the second book, and we can talk about it later when it is much less appropriate time-wise. But instead of that, I had a question for you that came up while we were celebrating Christmas.
Ooh.
I actually have two questions for you today. A lot of this is going to be questions for you. You also made me think of it in the last episode we recorded. But are there any times in your life that you can't remember?
Are there any times in my life that I can't remember?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So when we were celebrating Christmas, Reader was born right before Christmas. So we always kind of talk about him being the best Christmas present we ever got. And I was thinking about when he was born, and I have obviously a lot of memories from his birth, but I realized that first Christmas was a total blank for me. I had absolutely no memories, and I knew that your parents had visited, but I just couldn't pull up anything from that time. And after I started thinking about it, one or two things came up, but it's more or less a complete blank, which makes sense because we had just gone through like a very major thing. Mm-hmm. And I was exhausted, but it is kind of a black hole.
I have lots of blank spots.
Like distinctly blank?
I mean, yeah. I know I didn't like die because I'm still here.
Oh, are we talking about years?
I mean, I sure. I mean, I can't, like many people, I can't remember back past a certain point in my childhood just because that's how brains develop.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot that's been a blur.
Do you think,
especially the early years of Reader's life, I have a lot of individual memories within that period of time, but it feels like there are stretches of months where I don't remember much of anything. Maybe that's just a function of adulthood and mundanity and just kind of tuning out your day to day and just remembering the things that stand out. But yeah, maybe I also did too many drugs. I don't know. There are a variety of factors.
While Reader was a baby?
No. This is before.
It's just coming back to hit you at that point?
Just coming back to hit me.
Because you were talking last week about your deconversion.
Right.
And mentioned that I didn't have to go through one, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
So I never believed. But I did have a very distinct moment when I went to a religious camp. And my mom insists that every time I bring this up, I have to mention that she has fully apologized for sending me to this camp. But I don't think it was really her fault. But I went to a religious camp. And while I was there, I had this profound realization that there were people who actually believed. Like, I had sort of theoretically known that there were people who believed, but it just I didn't grow up in the kind of neighborhood where people talked about their faith a lot. So it was my first experience being around people who were very vocal about that. And then also there was a skit that was performed that was basically about, if you don't believe, you'll go to hell. And when that skit was performed, I immediately knew that I did not believe and would never believe. At least at the time, that's how I felt. But then also, you know, there are moments where you can be like, this little thing says everything you need to know about me.
Sure.
At the exact same moment, I was like, oh, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I feel 100% true.
You're like Pascal wagered yourself.
No, I just think
you could be wrong. What if I'm wrong? I have to do this thing.
Yeah, but I knew I couldn't. Like, the two things occurred to me simultaneously.
That's messed up.
That, like, I could not be wrong, and no essence of my being could believe this thing because it was so clearly untrue. So,
but you could be wrong.
But I could be wrong. Like, we are humans and we have limitations.
That's a crisis.
It was. And it like led to a big crisis. And so that moment is seared into my memory. Like, that whole time at camp, I can like go back into those memories and play them back like a movie. It is so profound. But so there were just like a lot of things that went on. At some point, I'll tell the whole story. But after that, the camp was for 2 weeks. And I decided that I needed to go home after a week, which was the best decision I ever made. But I had to tell them that I wanted to go home. And when I told them, I was taken aside by both of my counselors, and they sat with me for an hour trying to convince me to stay. And you have to understand that as a child, I was profoundly terrified of authority. I never wanted to be in trouble. And I don't know why I was so scared, because my parents were lovely. No one ever, like, I was never reprimanded badly. There was like never a time where I got in trouble and I was treated harshly. All of the adults in my life were incredibly encouraging and non-disciplinary. So I don't know why I felt that way, but I did. So to stand up to two people who sort of seem to be in figures of authority over me and be like, I know you're saying that I need to stay at this place, but I cannot stay. I have to go home. It was really like the bravest I'd ever been. But so there were two counselors. One was a boy, one was a girl. And I actually really liked the girl and got along with her very well. And I know that after I went home, I wrote to her. We wrote back and forth. And I feel like it was about the religious stuff I was thinking about. Mm-hmm. But that time is also just like blank. Like, I can tell you it happened, but I can't remember a thing that I wrote to her or a thing that she wrote back. And actually the whole period, so I came back and I was really scared. And then this was, well, it's not a total blank. Like, my experience of it is a total blank, because that was the summer before 6th grade. And then sometime in 7th grade, somebody in my class got appendicitis. And then I got terrified of having appendicitis and dying and going to hell. And that led into like a very long period of hypochondria. And I once brought this up and somebody was like, you know, it's not cool to make fun of having hypochondria. And I have to say, I am not making fun of it. I wasn't diagnosed because I didn't tell anybody what I was thinking about. But I literally thought about dying every second of the day that I wasn't doing other things. And
sound like Woody Allen.
Yeah. So that time is very seared in my memory. Like, I remember all of those thoughts and what that was like. But the period between camp and that happening, I must have still been thinking about religion, but I just can't tell you. It's just gone. I can tell you other stuff about that time, but I absolutely can't tell you what I was thinking about.
So as a parent, my first question would be, what do you think the moments of Reader and Go's childhood that they'll forget and they'll remember?
Oh,
obviously that's all rhetorical right now, but just now curious to see what those will be as they get older.
Well, I don't know, because I feel like for me, the times were, basically times of like fairly intense stress, either sort of physical or mental.
Right.
And so I don't know what those are going to be for them. I'm sure they're going to have, and also I don't know if everybody reacts this way. Like, I would be very curious how many people have this experience. I have no idea if this is an outlier or very common. Do you feel like it was the same for you? Like, do you feel like that was a stressful time and that's why you don't remember it? If you think back to those times that are sort of more blanks?
Honestly, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to qualify a period of time that I've forgotten because I've forgotten it.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I could speculate, but I mean, there's no real good in that because, it is just basically naked speculation. That's a really interesting idea to think about.
Do you think the boys have gone through any periods where they've experienced that kind of high stress? I don't know if I even know at this point.
I mean, the move.
Yeah, we moved from one country to another. Yeah.
It was a big change for them.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that would be high stress, probably for Reader more than Go because Reader is older.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a really interesting thing to think about. I just never really consider it. I'm just so busy here and now that I don't really worry about what I'll remember. Though I will say, since I started journaling a couple years ago, it's become easier to keep track of things just because I'm forcing myself to go back over days' events critically on a nightly basis.
Yeah. No, and if you had asked me a year ago, I think I would have said, oh no, I don't have any times like that. It was just other things coming up that made me think of them, that made me realize, oh no, this is gone. I can't tell you. Interesting. So, as promised, we are going to return to our one and only segment.
Promise we'll have more in the future.
Absolutely.
Variety is the spice of life.
Absolutely. But no, we're returning to backseat driving. And the question I want to ask you is from the Political Gabfest, Slate's Political Gabfest.
Sure.
So at the end of the year, They do a question show. And one of the questions that came up was, what fictional family would you have wanted to live in?
So you're asking me what fictional family I would have wanted to live in?
I will say, I have had a month and change to think about this. And I don't think I have a great answer, which is so
I have a couple of answers.
Oh, you have a couple?
Yeah, I have a couple of answers. I just can't decide which one is prime.
Oh, I don't think it has to be one.
Okay.
I don't think there has to be one.
I like a bunch.
Okay.
The family in Saga.
Oh, that's good. I did not think about that.
Like living with Sabrina's aunties in The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina would be fun.
Yeah.
I'd be biased and say I want to live with some of the families that I've written about. But I think that if I were to pick something that's a little more mainstream, there's a certain romantic nature to, living as an Elwyn in the world of Willow that I think I would want to be part of Willow's family.
Oh, 100%. We just started watching that series. And to get ready to watch the series.
All the nostalgia.
Oh, yeah. We went back and watched the original movie so Reader and Go could remember it. And I think what's so lovely about that film is it really is a story about parenting on a certain level.
And then you could get to like found family and then be like, I'd be cool being a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. It just depends on what you would consider to be family. Does it have to be, parents and children or parent and children? Can it be people who find each other and consider each other to be family, even though they're not related by blood?
I think so.
There are different ways of spinning it, but it's interesting. What were the hosts?
They had a really hard time with it too.
Yeah.
I don't remember one.
It's a weird question.
Somebody brought up Laura Ingalls Wilder, but sort of not wanting to live in that time period.
I was about to say there are some caveats that one needs to have when you're like, I want to live on the frontier. I just, I don't want to die of like a preventable disease or anything, but I do want to live on the frontier. I'm not a fan of frostbite, but the family seems loving. Or starving, but they seem loving.
Yeah. I mean, I do think Pa, like, I don't know how much Pa is like I want to say perfected, but that's not the word. Idealized. I don't know how much Pa is sort of idealized in her writing, but as far, and, it's sort of complex because that's a real person. But as far as sort of the book presentation of him, I do think he's a pretty amazing parental figure. I mean, I know people who were incredibly moved by To Kill a Mockingbird and just like wanted Atticus as their dad so bad.
Right.
I think when I was thinking about it, Halt and Catch Fire is one of my favorite shows.
I woun't want to be a child or a family member to Gord and Donna.
But really? Because I think yes. When his daughter is older, the way he treats her, like they go through hard times, but I feel like there is something very special about the relationship he ends up having with her in those final seasons.
There's a lot of stress in that family. Like you could say the same caveats for the Ingalls about you could say the same caveats about the family in Saga as you would about the Ingalls.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that the family in Saga perhaps has more trauma.
Right, but magical powers, space travel, battle.
Yeah.
At least it's exciting.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think it's interesting that when I was thinking about it, I was intrigued by how few families were that for me. Mm-hmm. And just how much children's literature is really about absent parents.
Right.
Or broken families. It's...
Insert Bible joke here.
Why?
Absent parents and broken families? Really? No?
No.
Okay. It's absent, God, joke, whatever.
Yeah.
It's all.
That.
I can't take you anywhere.
Nowhere. So, interesting. I like all of yours. Now you have me thinking about...
From a skeptical standpoint,
I know the other one, because you brought up comics.
Oh, hello. Okay,
I would have wanted to grow up in the family in For Better or For Worse.
That's good. I think
love that family.
Take that.
I love that family. Yeah.
No, for sure. But what I was about to say before you so rudely interrupted me, but I'm glad you finally found your zen, is that from a skeptical standpoint, I find myself gravitating towards families that, like, irrespective of what they believe, it's more of like what the results are for the kids, right? Like, I don't worship Satan. I think Satan's as, imaginary as any other, supernatural being. But I think that the care and guidance that Sabrina's aunties give her is really amazing. Mm-hmm. And it would be cool to grow up under that. I don't believe in space wizardry, but I think that in Saga, you have a great example of two parents who are born on the opposite side of the tracks who put all of that aside for their love for each other and then put all of their concerns for their own well-being aside because they love their daughter so much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I look at like rubber meets the road when it comes to parenting. And I don't care as much about what they believe. You know, again, I come back to being a consequentialist. It might seem, you know, reductionist. It might seem kind of boring, but it works for me from a skeptical standpoint. And so without even thinking about it along those lines, I find myself choosing family units that have that end result. And I'm not saying like I am a mouthpiece for the masses or anything, but I think there's something to be said for naturally gravitating towards those end results of love and support. And wouldn't it be nice if, regardless of what people believe, they could offer that sort of love and support for their children, regardless of the differences they might have with their children ideologically or whatever. But sadly, that does not happen.
Unknowingly, you just did the perfect segue into the next topic.
Oh, no, knowingly. Knowingly. I can read your mind.
That's a terrifying thought. So we have our first topic based on Christian parenting advice.
Oh, Jesus.
So, like I said, when I mentioned last year that I was going to start looking for Christian parenting advice, I actually have been trying to stay away from sort of the obviously bad advice, because I think it is more interesting to discuss stuff that is a little bit more subtle.
Okay.
But
the idea of subtle Christian parenting advice itself is intriguing, because usually the Christian parenting advice is like sledgehammer to the forehead.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's fair. I've been listening to a mix of stuff. So when I did a search, I will
take your word for it because I avoid it like the plague.
Yeah. So when I did a search, I actually did a search for progressive Christianity, progressive Christian parenting advice. And I found this one podcast, and I now realize that it came up under that search because the host hates progressive Christianity.
Interesting.
And talks about it all the time as like the worst evil.
Oh, but yes, that is definitely the worst evil.
It really is.
Progressive Christianity.
And so, let me see. Okay, so the original podcast that I started listening to is it the Elisa Childers?
Alyssa Childers.
Alyssa Childers. Okay. The Alyssa Childers podcast. And then she started another podcast just recently called Unshaken Faith with another woman that talks about sort of current social issues.
Yeah.
So it wasn't what I was looking for, because this like definitely leans into the like very bad Christian advice, but it is like a fascinating car wreck, so I can't stop listening. But their first episode of the new podcast was about American Girl, because they put out a puberty book for girls that was actually quite good on trans issues and LGBTQ issues. So of course they hated it. They absolutely hated it. It was a fun one to listen to, because there's times where it's like, I know you're trashing this thing, but like, I'm really glad to know about it, because good on you, American Girl. You did not have to be that forward thinking on things. So a lot of it is very boring. Just, how dare you suggest the girls might, and look, it's American Girl, right? It's not that extreme when you actually hear when they break it down, right? So it's just like, you could try wearing different clothes and see what feels most comfortable to you. God forbid. But the thing that made me interested, that I wanted to talk about, is one of the things that made them the most mad was there's a section of the book that says, if you don't feel comfortable talking to your parents about something, here are some other people you could talk to. And suggest talking to sort of other people in your life, like coaches or teachers. And it also gives some organizations you can reach out to. Of course, they hated the organizations because they were affirming of LGBTQ identities.
Right.
But I think it's interesting because this comes up a lot when you hear Christian parents talk about some of these social issues, that they very much want everything to remain with the parents. So when you hear people being very mad about trans issues, one of the big talking points is that schools do not tell parents always when children change their pronouns. And a lot of parents feel like it is incredibly wrong that the parent would not be told when something like that happens. And this, I think, is actually a more subtle issue because I have two thoughts.
I have a thought.
Well,
you go.
Okay.
No, you go. We'll see if you pick up mine.
So my first thought is I understand why they're mad about the specific situation because they feel like the advice given by these people that the book are recommending is going to be bad advice, right? So I understand why they would be mad. But in kind of a bigger context, I feel like there is a refusal to admit that there are parents out there who are not supportive of their children. There's sort of no space given in these conversations for the reality that there are parents that are not taking care of their kids or providing the loving environment that they need. This sort of, it all has to come back to the parents, does not leave any room for children who are struggling and do not have support in their lives.
Well, it should come back to the parents, but it should come back to the parents organically because the kids should trust their parents. And if the child doesn't trust the parents, there's a reason a child shouldn't be in that position where they don't trust their parents to know this detail about themselves. The child should have a relationship with the parents that encourages them to tell their parents first. And so if a parent is upset about a school knowing something that about the kid that the parents don't know and think they should, that's just like bald-faced projection. Like the apologists who get upset about this nonsense, there are utter cowards because they're afraid, like you said, to admit that the onus is on them, that they like having this sort of traditional top-down approach, this authoritarian approach. And so they bristle at any semblance of loss of control of that, right? And so when they don't have that, it's of course the other person's fault because it can't be the authority structure's fault because the authority structure is sacrosanct. So it has to be the school's fault, the outsider. The outsider is ruining our child. It's the drag queens are going to turn your kids into monsters, right? It's always the external, and there's a perpetual lack of self-reflection, which is a hallmark of skepticism. And that's one of the strengths of being a skeptic is that you're not immune to making these mistakes, but you are more inclined, by and large, to see what you do in a more critical light, and to be more reasonable about your culpability, hopefully, and to not be afraid to turn that lens back on yourself.
But I think exactly along those lines, I can imagine that there might be a point where Reader or Go doesn't feel that they can share something with us or is scared to share something with us because they don't know how we would react. And I think like I might, like if they were really struggling, I would kind of want the school to tell me.
Yeah. But I wouldn't be mad at the school and I wouldn't be mad at the kid. I would be mad at myself. I would be upset with myself. I would immediately wonder, what did I do as a parent to make my child not think they could come to me with this? I would be thankful that my child was honest with the school administrators. So in their primary social setting outside of the home, they could potentially have support of their peers and the administrative staff, right? Like I would not be upset at the school. I would not be upset at my kid. I would then go to my child and say, okay, the school told me this. Please first understand, I'm not upset at all with you or the school. I want to understand your thinking, and I want to give you all the time and space to be able to tell me, like, in your terms, on your time, about this thing that is so important to you. And then I would shut up. And if they said, I don't want to talk about it, I would respect that. And if they do want to talk about it, or if they're on the fence about it, I would give them all the time they need, because I love them and I want them to feel safe with me, and if I did something to make them feel less than safe or unsure about what my reaction might be, I would apologize for that too. That's one of the reasons why all this time as a parent, I've prioritized telling them over and over again, especially while we see depictions of different sorts of families and different sorts of identities in media, in TV and books and film and on social media, that we as parents, you and I, support and love them regardless of how they choose to frame themselves and their identity and how not only they view themselves, but how they want the world to view them, how they present, and like that seems like very cut and dried from my position, at least. And I go out of my way to reiterate that over and over again. You've heard me, but that doesn't mean that when the time comes that they're going to remember that, or that any of that would have sunk in. But to make myself feel better as a parent, I say these things to them, because that's the sort of parent that I want to be. I'm sort of manifesting it, hopefully. And so whether or not it actually sticks is one thing, but they are going to have those moments that will surprise us.
Yeah.
And a good parent will not view that surprise as anything other than, oh, this is something that blindsided me. It threatens my ego, perhaps, but I need to get over that because I love my child more than I love my attachment to my own views of myself as this parent person.
Just based, and this may all change, but just sort of based on who the boys are now, Go is very expressive and very verbal.
Oh, yes.
To say the very least.
Oh, yes.
And Reader, I feel like, can have a harder time putting his thoughts into words.
Oh, yes.
And so I think about that a lot. And I try to talk with both of them, but I've talked a lot with Reader. Also, there was a period where we were sort of reading books about puberty. He's not there yet, but kind of in preparation. And I talk with him a lot about how, there may be times where you don't feel comfortable talking to me. And one thing I do feel good about, which wasn't as true for me, is he has such close relationships with his grandparents.
Oh, yeah.
That I always remind him, I'm like, it's okay if you don't feel comfortable talking to me, but please remember that there are other people in your life. So, if you don't feel comfortable talking to me, your grandparents would love to talk to you. Your coach would love to talk to you. There are people.
Yes.
I'm not the last resort.
Your school teachers or principal. Like, again, I don't understand this getting mad at the school thing. Like, you want your kid to be happy and healthy. If your kid needs an outlet and your kid doesn't think that you are that appropriate outlet, would you rather be right or would you rather be rich? Was something that was a refrain in an organization, a business organization I used to be a part of. Would you rather be right or would you rather be rich? And it has to do with humility and ego. Like, are you so attached to your own perception of a potential solution that you're willing to forego an actual solution that defies your perception in favor of that perception, right? Like, do you want a happy and healthy child? Yes? Great. Let your kid vent to whomever they need to vent to. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. If what's the end result? What's the utility of the situation? If the end result is your kid copes with a stressful situation that might end up becoming a negative without an outlet, give the kid an outlet. I don't care who helps my child. Help my child. And I will catch up.
I always think about, I worked on a documentary and we interviewed.
You worked on cool documentaries, by the way.
I did.
You were very fortunate.
We interviewed an amazing man, and he told the story of his son. I forget how old his son was when this happened. I think he was in college, around that age. But there was a night and his son slipped a note under his door.
Oh, yeah, I remember this story. Yeah. Please tell. I love this story.
And he and his wife read it. And the note said, "I'm gay. I completely understand if you're not okay with it. And if you need me to move out, I will." And he was so taken aback because he would never ask his son to move out. He was completely fine with the fact that his son was gay and was terrifically shocked that it would ever occur to him that it would even be an issue for the family. And obviously told the son that, and it was all fine. But I think it has certainly made me very conscious about saying things out loud, not just assuming that they will be understood. You know, when the boys ask about marriage, I'm like, well, you know, you may not get married at all. You may have a partner that you never marry. You may marry a man. You may marry a woman. You may all these possibilities exist and are okay. You know, talking about having babies. Well, you know, you may marry somebody of the opposite sex and be able to have a baby easily. You may marry somebody of the opposite sex and struggle with fertility like your dad and I did and have to do something different. You may marry somebody of the same sex and have to do some of those same things. You may never get married and need to figure out how to have a child as a single person. You know, just present the full.
You know what we need to do is we need to add in cloning. We haven't talked to them about cloning because they're going to be at that age and maybe like 2 decades from now.
Yeah.
What if there's a thing where people just like raise their own clones? Like, what if that becomes a thing? You could be a single person your whole life. You want to have a child, just split yourself off. You raise a small you. And then, you know, little you grows up to be big you and the cycle continues perhaps. I don't know. That seems like an amendment to the conversation that we have to start giving them so they're prepared.
That is absurd, but it actually
makes me
dilemmas. Think of something because
it's absurd until it exists.
Well, that's the thing. So, because we're watching Blade Runner, and I told you last night, ever? I think with the kids, good times. But what I find so interesting about futurism is it really shows you kind of the limits of imagination. Because I was saying last night, they can imagine genetically engineering people and flying cars, but they cannot imagine the internet or digital photos.
Or LCD screens.
Yes. You know, it's just fascinating. And I think, you know, as much as I'm trying to do this, just thinking about trans issues, like my parents never would have thought, I think, based on people's consciousness at the time when I was growing up, to say, oh, you know, and if you feel like a different gender, that's okay too. Like, it just wouldn't have even been part of the thought process.
Yeah.
Because of what was, you know, sort of visible and in the consciousness at the time.
Well, that's what I was getting at before. You know, I'm trying to future-proof my relationship with my kids. You know, we're watching Queer Eye. I can't wait to start watching Drag Race with them. Since I've never watched Drag Race, we just watch We're Here. And I think, you know, drag shows are super cool and super expressive. And I love the costumes. And I love, you know, seeing the transformations on We're Here. And I know Drag Race is different because they're actual drag queens already. It isn't like randos signing up for a drag show, not really knowing what they're getting, but just seeing the variety of experience and presentation is important. So that way, as society, this is my thought, at least. We haven't talked about this. So here we go, universe. You're hearing this for the first time. But my thought is that the more variety I present to my kids as far as depictions of presentation and sexuality and relationships, the more likely it is that if they decide that they have this urge, this need to present themselves in a certain way, to have a certain kind of relationship, that I will have this history with them of showing them really supportive, loving depictions of different sorts of presentations, different sorts of relationships. So that way, no matter what they choose to have, they assume that I am going to be okay with it. And they assume that I'm going to love and support them regardless. That's my only hope as a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. But that's the thing is, again, part of being a skeptic is, it's that humility of knowing that the choices you make with these decisions you make as a parent, they're not necessarily going to work. And when they don't work, you refine your approach, right? But this is something that's so far off that we don't know if it's going to work or not for years, potentially, right?
Yeah.
And so all we can do is keep pressing ahead by giving them, doing this shotgun approach where we give them all sorts of different data points to choose from, but to all have them be rooted in that love and support. So check this out, circling back to our first segment, talking about what family, we might, or was that the interstitial?
That was the interstitial.
There you go. The last segment, about what sort of family you would want to grow up in. What I said before stands here in a really bold way, because any of those families that I rattled off, though weird and unorthodox, they were all supportive. Right. And so that's my goal for my kids. So no matter where the vicissitudes of life take them, my goal is that they know that I'm supportive and that I don't care where they end up as much as I care about how they view themselves, and that they know that I support them no matter what. Because for me, that's what a family is. It's that support, regardless of who gives it. It's that support mechanism that they'll love you regardless, and they'll support you regardless. And sometimes that love and support means, offering stern correction, right? Like, it isn't just blanket approval of any decision a child makes, of course. But as far as who they view themselves as, who they love, those aren't necessarily actions. Those are beliefs. And so if it's a belief about a person's self, right, it's not like a belief about an external entity the kid can't define or demonstrate. This is about a belief about who they are as a person, knowing their own mind. And I refuse to gaslight my kid. I refuse to pretend like I know my kid's mind better than they do. Just like I rail against apologists who claim to know my mind better than I do in defense of their own religious beliefs, right? I don't want to be the secular version of that on the parenting side. I'm not going to gaslight my kid, right? They have this sense of themselves, and I've got to meet them there. Otherwise, in my mind, at least, I'm a bad parent. I'm doing it wrong. Yeah.
Just bringing it back to the teacher, I was thinking about, and I don't know how this would even come up, but, the one situation I can think of where I would be like, I'd really want to know is if the kids were expressing strong religious belief. And not to necessarily change it, they don't have to believe or not believe the same way we do. I think I've often said, I think I can imagine him winding up in a lot of different places.
He could have wound up a cult leader.
I mean, that kid and the magical thinking, it's very strong in him. But,
and the use of language.
Yeah. But I would just, and I guess you're right. I'd be happy if the school was a safe place for them to express things. But man, I think I would feel really bad if I didn't know and couldn't be there to have those conversations with them.
Yeah. I think back to The Americans, where their daughter had that whole, Christian Renaissance.
Right.
To parents who were, Soviet atheists.
Yeah. So in that one circumstance, I might be a hypocrite.
Oh, no, I stand by what I said. Like, I would always rather know, and I would always rather have the school tell me, regardless. But I would, even if I didn't know, I would be happy that that my kid had that support. And then when I did find out about it, again, I would blame myself first. Mm-hmm. And then I would just start asking questions and giving the kid the space to provide whatever responses, he sees fit to offer at the time.
Yeah.
It's one of those one steps at a time thing.
Because I don't, schools are in such a hard place. I can't imagine. Because I feel like sometimes you do want to bring parents in and make things a team effort. Mm-hmm. But also if a kid is expressing to you that they don't want their parents to know, that is a tricky place to be in. I don't think I could do it. Teachers are amazing.
Yeah.
So on that note, should we wrap things up?
Sure.
So as always, we have to thank First Frame Music and Jonathan Zalbin for the music for this podcast. I'll do another reminder to follow us on Instagram at The Family Skeptical.
And that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.